The stars shone bright over Nalthoria, a world of towering crystal cities and flowing rivers that sparkled under 3 moons. For thousands of years, the Nalthorians lived in perfect harmony. Unlike humans who spoke with words, they shared thoughts directly through telepathic bonds. Their entire society functioned as one giant family, connected in ways humans could only dream about. Lee stood at the edge of the asteroid mining operation, his blue skin reflecting the distant sun's rays. As chief mining engineer, he had pushed for this expedition to the outer reaches of their system. The minerals in these asteroids will power our cities for centuries, he had promised the Council of Elders. "Sir, we've detected something unusual in the core of asteroid KX-42, said Park, Lee's assistant, her eyes wide with excitement. "It appears to be organic material preserved in ice," Lee nodded. "Bring it back for study. Perhaps it's evidence of ancient life." Neither realized they had just made the worst decision in Nalthorian history. 3 days later, in the science labs of Central City, researchers cracked open the ice-encased sample. Inside lay dormant spores, preserved for millions of years. The sea. Lab's heating systems awakened them, and within hours invisible particles floated through the air vents. The first cases appeared among the lab workers. Han, a senior researcher, suddenly lost connection to the collective consciousness that united all Nalthorians. It was like going blind and deaf at once. He collapsed, his mind suddenly trapped inside his own skull after a lifetime of shared thoughts. "I can't feel anyone," he whispered to the medical team. "I'm alone." For a species that had never known true isolation, this was worse than physical pain. Within a week, thousands showed symptoms. The disease spread through air, water, and touch. Nalthorians would suddenly clutch their heads, screaming as their telepathic connections snapped one by one. Choi, the head healer, worked without sleep to understand the pathogen. "It attacks the special brain cells that allow our telepathy," she explained to the frightened council. "Once infected, these cells die, and our people lose their connection to others." In the streets, chaos erupted. Families couldn't sense each other anymore. Children cried out psychically for parents who could no longer hear them. The elderly, whose physical senses had weakened with age, but whose telepathic abilities had remained strong, now sat in confused silence. The Galactic Council, which had united the 12 most advanced species across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, received Nalthoria's distress calls. They dispatched their finest medical vessels with doctors from worlds that had conquered diseases for millennia. "We bring treatments that have cured 1,000 plagues," announced Min, the lead doctor from the aquatic world of Blumar. The Nalthorians welcomed them with desperate hope, but the pathogen proved cunning beyond anything the Council had encountered. Each treatment worked briefly, then the spores would change, adapting within hours. Medicine that saved hundreds in the morning would fail by afternoon. "It's like it learns from our attempts," said Jun, a doctor who had just watched an entire hospital ward die despite his best efforts. "This isn't natural evolution. Something about this pathogen seems almost intelligent." The death toll climbed from thousands to millions. The beautiful crystal cities, once humming with the energy of shared thoughts, grew silent and dark. Crematoriums worked day and night. Parents buried children. The telepathic web that had defined Nalthorian civilization for 50,000 years unraveled thread by thread. After 60 days of failed treatments, the Galactic Council held an emergency session. The vote was painful but clear. Full quarantine of the Nalthorian system. "No ships in or out," declared the council leader, her voice heavy with regret. "We cannot risk this contagion spreading to other worlds." Giant quarantine beacons were placed at the system's edge, warning all travelers away. Supply drops were arranged, but no physical contact would be allowed. The remaining Nalthorians watched from their dying world as the medical ships departed, leaving only automated monitoring stations behind. On Nalthoria, those who survived the first waves of infection faced a new reality. Their cities, designed for a telepathic population, became difficult to navigate without shared consciousness. Simple tasks became complicated. Their art, music, and literature, all based on telepathic experiences, lost meaning. "We are becoming strangers to ourselves," said Kang, one of the remaining elders, as he looked out over what was once the capital's central plaza. Where millions once gathered to share in massive thought celebrations, only a few thousand shuffled, about isolated in their own minds despite standing side by side. Hope faded as the death count passed 12 million. Treatments failed. The few children born after the plague began showed no signs of telepathic ability at all. Scientists calculated that within one generation, their entire way of life would vanish from the galaxy forever. As the first year of quarantine ended, the Nalthorians prepared for extinction. But across the stars, on a small blue planet considered primitive by galactic standards, a message was about to be received that would change everything. The great communication towers of Nalthoria, once used to share joyful messages across the galaxy, now served a single desperate purpose. From the highest point in Central City, a continuous signal beamed outward, carrying the same message in 300 languages. "Help us. We are dying." The message included detailed information about the pathogen, symptoms, and failed treatments. It was both a plea and a warning. Come prepared or don't come at all. Jin, once the youngest member of the Council of Elders, and now one of the few who remained alive, supervised the broadcast station. The sight before him would have been unimaginable just 1 year earlier. The Grand Communication Center, designed to accommodate 100 telepathic operators working in perfect harmony, now housed just 12 survivors. Each worked alone, struggling with equipment designed for shared minds. "Increase power to the long-range arrays," Jin ordered, his voice hoarse from disuse. Like all survivors, he found speaking aloud awkward and tiring after a lifetime of telepathic communication. "Power increased by 30%, replied Sun, a communications specialist who had lost her entire family to the plague. "But I don't think it matters. The quarantine beacons are blocking most of our signal." Jin placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture they had learned from studying other species, as Nalthorians had rarely needed physical contact to express connection before. "Someone will hear us. Someone must." Across the stars, the Galactic Council gathered for their quarterly meeting. The Nalthoria situation appeared as the 6th item on a long agenda. "The pathogen continues to adapt to all known treatments," reported Song, the Council's chief medical officer. Her holographic image flickered above the circular table where representatives from 12 worlds sat in judgment. "After 342 failed protocols, my team recommends maintaining the quarantine indefinitely." Murmurs filled the chamber. The Council prided itself on never abandoning a member world, but the statistics projected on the wall left little room for hope. 86% of Nalthoria's population was already gone. "Perhaps we should consider the Eularian solution," suggested a delegate from the gas giant Toralis, referring to an ancient policy where doomed civilizations were granted merciful extinction rather than prolonged suffering. The chamber fell silent. No one had invoked the Eularian solution in 7,000 years. Elder Doe, the oldest Nalthorian representative and one of the few still healthy enough to attend council meetings remotely, felt cold dread wash over him. "For you suggest killing us all, after promising help for a year?" "With respect, Elder," replied the council leader, "we have tried to help. Every medical approach known to 12 advanced civilizations has failed. The quarantine must remain to protect billions across the galaxy." The vote was called. One by one, representatives stood, spoke their world's name and said, "Maintain quarantine." When all had voted, the result was unanimous. The Nalthorians would receive supply drops, but no visitors, no medical teams, no new treatments. They would be left to die as their plague ran its course. That night, Elder Du remained alone in the communications hub, long after others had left. At 233 years old, he had served on the council for nearly a century. He knew its rules, its secrets, and most importantly, its blind spots. "Computer access restricted file Earth 0472, he whispered. The screen lit up with information about a planet the council considered barely worth monitoring, a blue world whose inhabitants had only recently discovered space travel. Du had always been fascinated by Earth. While other council members dismissed humans as primitive and violent, he saw something different in their history. They had survived diseases that should have wiped them out. Their immune systems were remarkably adaptable, and most intriguingly, they had no natural telepathic abilities whatsoever. Could that be why they might survive what kills us? He wondered aloud. His gnarled blue fingers moved across the control panel, bypassing security protocols he had helped design decades ago. With a few commands, he redirected a small communication satellite, aimed it toward Earth, and began transmitting. The message was simple: coordinates to Nalthoria, basic information about the plague, and a plea for help. He added something the official broadcasts had omitted: the fact that the Galactic Council had abandoned them. To anyone receiving this on Earth, he recorded, fighting back tears, "You are our last hope. Your species has overcome countless plagues. Your bodies fight diseases in ways ours cannot. The advanced worlds have failed us. Perhaps a younger world will show more courage." The transmission would take months to reach Earth, and the Council would eventually detect his unauthorized communication. Du would face punishment, but he wouldn't live to see it. The first symptoms of the plague had appeared in his neural patterns that morning. As he finished the transmission, Du looked out at the 3 moons rising over his dying world. "I may never know if they received our call," he whispered. "I may never know if they answered." 6 months later, a small ship from an insignificant blue planet would breach the quarantine zone, carrying humans who had no idea what awaited them or how they would change the galaxy forever. The starship, Mercy, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nalthorian system, its engines glowing blue against the darkness. Warning beacons flashed red around them, broadcasting the same message in every known language: quarantine zone, entry forbidden by Galactic Council decree. On the bridge, Captain Jin-Ho stared at the warnings and then at the small blue planet ahead. "Last chance to turn back," he said to the crew. "Once we cross that line, Earth will probably face sanctions." Dr. Kim stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the same view. At 42, she had spent 15 years researching neural pathways in unusual conditions. When the strange message from space had reached Earth 6 months ago, she had been the first to volunteer. "Those beacons mean millions are dying while advanced aliens do nothing," she said quietly. "I didn't come this far to turn around." Jin-Ho nodded and turned to his communications officer. "Send the message we prepared. Let them know. We're coming to help, not harm." The ship pushed forward, alarms blaring as they crossed the quarantine boundary. Within minutes, 3 sleek vessels appeared, their designs clearly not of Earth origin. "Human vessel," came a stern voice over the comms. "You have violated Galactic Council quarantine protocols. Turn back immediately or face consequences." "Doctor," Kim leaned forward. "This is Dr. Kim Soo-jin of Earth. We received a distress call and we've come to help. We bring medical personnel and supplies." "Your planet is not a council member," the voice replied coldly. "Your interference is illegal and dangerous. The situation on Nalthoria is beyond your primitive understanding." Jin-Ho muted the communication and looked at Dr. Kim. "They really don't think much of us, do they?" "Good," she replied with a slight smile. "They'll underestimate us. That's humanity's secret weapon." The standoff lasted 3 hours. The council ships tried to block their path, issued threats, and even attempted to disable their engines with some kind of energy beam. But Captain Jin-Ho had been a fighter pilot before commanding space missions, and he maneuvered the bulky medical ship with surprising skill. When they finally broke through and entered Nalthoria's atmosphere, the sight below stunned them into silence. Once beautiful cities lay half empty. No vehicles moved on the roads. The few figures visible moved slowly, as if carrying heavy weights. "Find us a landing spot near their largest medical facility," Dr. Kim ordered, already preparing her equipment. The team that stepped out of the Mercy looked nothing like the advanced medical units the Galactic Council had sent. There were no gleaming robots, no fancy uniforms, no miraculous devices. Just 30 humans in practical hazmat suits, carrying containers of surprisingly ordinary-looking equipment. A small group of Nalthorians waited at a distance, their blue skin dull and their eyes cautious. One stepped forward, taller than the rest. "I am Elder Yu, last surviving member of our medical council," he said in careful English. "You should not have come. The disease adapts to all treatments." Dr. Kim approached him, her face visible through her helmet. That's exactly why we came. On Earth, we have a long history of fighting diseases that adapt and change. It's what we do best. Within hours, the humans had established a field hospital in what once had been a grand public building. Dr. Kim worked quickly, directing her team with the efficiency of someone who had practiced for this moment. Set up the blood analysis lab there, imaging equipment by the east wall. Junseo, get the portable DNA sequencers running. Taeyeon, start interviewing survivors about symptom progression. A young Nalthorian named Bin watched in fascination. Your people move so quickly, but I don't see you communicating with each other. Dr. Hana, Kim's assistant, smiled as she unpacked medical supplies. We're used to working without telepathy. Humans have always had to speak or use body language to communicate. It's normal for us. How strange, Bin replied. Perhaps that is why you might succeed where others failed. You understand how minds work without connections. By nightfall, council representatives had landed, their elegant ships making the human vessel look crude by comparison. They marched into the field hospital, led by a tall figure with metallic skin. This facility is unauthorized, the leader announced. Your presence violates 16 different council regulations. You will depart immediately. Dr. Kim didn't even look up from her microscope. We're not leaving. You have no authority here. Earth is not a council member. Now Kim stood facing the alien official directly. We have the only authority that matters, an invitation from the people dying here. While your council voted to let them perish, they called to us. We answered. Your primitive medicine cannot possibly... Our primitive medicine, Kim interrupted, comes from a planet where we fought pandemics throughout our entire history. We survived smallpox, plague, influenza, polio, HIV, and dozens more. Fighting adaptive diseases is in our DNA. She pointed to blood samples already being processed. In the 12 hours since we landed, we've collected more data than your teams did in months. Why? Because we're not looking for a quick technological fix. We understand something you don't. Sometimes the oldest approaches work when the newest fail. The council representative seemed taken aback by her boldness. The quarantine exists for the safety of the galaxy. Then maintain it, Captain Jin-Ho said, stepping forward. Keep us all here until we solve this or die trying. But we're not leaving these people. After the council representatives departed, making numerous threats about sanctions and consequences, Elder Yu approached Dr. Kim with tears in his eyes. No one has spoken to the council that way in 1,000 years, he said. Why would you risk so much for strangers? Kim looked across the room where her team worked tirelessly, setting up equipment and taking samples. Then she looked at the Nalthorians waiting patiently for help, their once vibrant civilization fading around them. Because that's what humans do, she said simply. When we hear a cry for help, something in us needs to answer. It's both our greatest weakness and our greatest strength. For the first time in over a year, a feeling long forgotten began to stir among the Nalthorians. It was hope. 3 weeks after the humans arrived, their field hospital had expanded into 3 buildings. Unlike the Council's sterile medical ships with their automated systems, the human facility buzzed with constant activity. Improvised labs filled rooms where Nalthorians had once gathered for telepathic concerts. Beds lined hallways, and the air smelled of disinfectant and coffee, a bitter earth drink that the human doctors consumed in alarming quantities. Dr. Kim hadn't slept more than 4 hours at a stretch since landing. Dark circles framed her eyes as she hunched over a microscope, comparing blood samples from infected Nalthorians with human blood. You should rest, said Jiwoo, the team's youngest doctor. You can't save anyone if you collapse. Kim rubbed her eyes. I'm close to something. Look at this. On the screen beside her, 2 neural cells were displayed side by side. One blue-tinged Nalthorian, one human. Both contained the pathogen, but while the Nalthorian cell was deteriorating, the human cell appeared unchanged. The spores enter. Our cells too, Kim explained, but they can't do damage. Something in our neural structure stops them. But why? Jiwoo asked, leaning closer. I think it's because we don't have telepathic abilities, Kim said, excitement growing in her voice. The pathogen specifically attacks the parts of Nalthorian brains that allow shared consciousness. We don't have those structures, so the pathogen has nothing to destroy. Word of a possible breakthrough spread through the hospital. Hope was dangerous after so many disappointments, but the Nalthorians couldn't help gathering outside the lab, watching the humans work with an intensity that made up for their lost telepathic connection. That evening, Kim called a meeting of the entire human team. They gathered in what had once been a grand hall, now converted to a combination cafeteria and conference room. Maps of infection spread covered the walls, alongside charts tracking treatment attempts. The Galactic Council approached this all. "Wrong," Kim said, standing before her exhausted colleagues. "They tried to kill the pathogen with advanced technologies, but this spore has survived for millions of years by adapting to whatever tries to destroy it." She pointed to a simple diagram. "Instead of trying to kill it, we need to teach Nalthorian bodies to live with it, just like our bodies do." "You mean a vaccine?" asked Sungmin, their immunology expert. "More like an adaptation therapy," Kim replied. "Human blood contains antibodies that neutralize the pathogen without destroying it. If we can transfer these to the Nalthorians and teach their bodies to produce similar defenses, that's 19th century medicine," said Jinho with a slight smile. "Blood transfusions and antibody therapy. The Council would consider it primitive." "Exactly," Kim nodded. "Sometimes older methods work precisely because they're simple. This pathogen evolved to counter complex attacks. It doesn't know how to fight basic biology." The team worked through the night, creating a treatment protocol that would have been familiar to Earth doctors 100 years earlier, with some modern refinements. They isolated the specific human antibodies that neutralized the pathogen, then created a delivery system compatible with Nalthorian biology. By morning, they were ready to try it on their first volunteer. Elder Yu sat calmly as Dr. Kim explained the procedure. "We'll infuse these modified human antibodies into your bloodstream. They should begin neutralizing the pathogen immediately. Then we'll introduce a compound that will teach your immune system to create its own version of these antibodies." "You are using your own blood to save us?" Yu asked, looking at the reddish fluid in the IV bag. "Donated by everyone on our team," Kim confirmed. "Each of us has natural immunity that your people lack. The Council said human biology was too primitive to be compatible with ours." Kim smiled as she inserted the IV needle. "The Council underestimated how adaptable human biology is. Our immune systems evolved through thousands of epidemics. We're walking medical libraries." Hours passed as everyone watched Elder Yu for signs of improvement or deterioration. By evening, his blood tests showed the first positive change. In a year, the pathogen was being neutralized without adapting. "I feel different," Yu said wonderingly. "The pain in my neural pathways is decreasing." Over the next 3 days, they treated 20 more patients. 19 showed improvement. The human team refined the treatment based on each result, adapting their approach with the same flexibility that characterized human medicine throughout history. On the 5th day, a Council observation ship landed. Their medical officer, Hyun, had been monitoring from orbit. He entered the hospital with obvious distaste for the makeshift conditions. "Our sensors detected changes in patient neural patterns," he said stiffly. "The Council demands to know what treatment you're applying." Kim led him through the facility, explaining their approach while patients visibly improved around them. Some were already sitting up, talking with each other, trying to rebuild connections without telepathy. "This is archaic," Hyun said, examining their equipment. "Blood-derived therapies were abandoned by advanced civilizations millennia ago." Suddenly, a young Nalthorian girl who had been near death the previous day walked past them, holding a human nurse's hand. "She's recovering?" Hyun asked, unable to hide his shock. 47 patients so far, Kim confirmed. "The treatment works because it's simple. Your advanced approaches try to outsmart a pathogen that's had millions of years to evolve defenses. We're not fighting it. We're teaching Nalthorian bodies to live with it harmlessly, just as human bodies do." Hyun stared at the recovery ward, where blue-skinned patients were gathering in small groups, learning to communicate without telepathy. The Council believed humans were too primitive to contribute meaningful medical science to the galaxy, he said quietly. Dr. Hannah, passing by with a tray of supplies, laughed. Being primitive is our secret weapon. We had to solve problems with basic tools for most of our history. It taught us to think differently. Later that day, patient number 100 received treatment. As the antibodies flowed into her system, Elder Yu addressed the gathered humans. "When the most advanced species in the galaxy abandoned us," he said, his voice breaking, "the ones they called primitive risked everything to save us. The Council must now acknowledge what we have learned. True advancement isn't measured by technology, but by the willingness to help others regardless of risk." Outside the hospital, a crowd had gathered. For the first time in more than a year, Nalthorians sang together, not with their minds, but with their voices. It was imperfect, sometimes discordant, but to the humans who watched, it was the most beautiful sound in the galaxy. The gardens bloomed with flowers of every color beneath Nalthoria's 3 moons. Where once there had been only silence and death, now laughter and singing filled the air. Children ran along paths that wound between memorial stones, each carved with the names of those lost to the plague. But this was not a place of sadness. It was a celebration of survival, of rebirth, of 2 worlds coming together against impossible odds. 1 year had passed since the first successful treatments. 1 year since humanity proved that sometimes the oldest, simplest approaches could succeed where advanced technology failed. Dr. Kim stood at the edge of the central plaza, watching Nalthorians and humans mingling freely. The disease was now controlled, with no new cases reported in 4 months. Over 80% of survivors had fully recovered, though none had regained their telepathic abilities. Instead, they had learned to speak, to write, to express themselves, in ways humans had always known. "It still amazes me," said Elder Yu, approaching with the help of a cane. Though recovered, many older Nalthorians struggled with the physical aspects of non-telepathic communication. "Our children now speak with their mouths more naturally than I ever will," Kim smiled. "They adapt faster. Children always do." "Much like humanity itself," Yu replied. "The youngest species in the galaxy, yet the one who saved us when the ancient ones had given up." Across the plaza, final preparations were underway for what many called the most significant galactic ceremony in 1,000 years. Delegates from all 12 council worlds had arrived. Their ships filled the sky, far more elegant than the utilitarian Earth vessels that now regularly traveled to Nalthoria with medical supplies and construction teams. "They're still uncomfortable with us," Captain Jinho said, joining Kim and Yu. He nodded toward a group of council representatives, keeping slight distance from the humans. "We broke their rules, ignored their quarantine, and proved them wrong. 3 things the mighty council isn't used to. They'll adjust," Yu said with surprising optimism. "They must. Today changes everything." At the center of the garden stood a veiled structure over 15 feet tall. Around it gathered dignitaries from Earth and representatives from every surviving Nalthorian city. The council members took their traditional places on elevated platforms, though these seemed less imposing than in previous ceremonies. The council leader, a tall figure whose crystalline skin reflected the moonlight, stepped forward. "For 50,000 years," she began, her voice amplified across the plaza, "the Galactic Council has united the most advanced civilizations in our shared galaxy. We have prided ourselves on our knowledge, our technologies, our enlightened approach to the challenges of existence." She paused, looking across the gathered crowd. "Yet when faced with the greatest medical crisis in recent history, our advanced methods failed. We voted to abandon a member world to its fate, believing survival impossible. We were wrong." A murmur ran through the crowd. Never in recorded history had the Council acknowledged such a significant error. The people of Earth, whom we judged primitive and unready for galactic community, demonstrated courage we had forgotten and wisdom we had overlooked. They showed us that advancement is not merely measured in technology, but in compassion, in willingness to help others regardless of risk or reward. She gestured, and the veil fell from the monument. Carved from iridescent blue stone native to Nalthoria, it depicted a human hand and a Nalthorian hand clasped together. Water flowed over the sculpture, catching moonlight and creating a shimmering effect that made the hands appear to move. "Today we correct our error, Earth is formally invited to join the Galactic Council as its 13th member world. Applause erupted, especially from the Nalthorians. Earth's representatives, led by a woman named Su Jin, approached the council platform. As Earth's ambassador, she carried the formal response that had been debated for months on her home planet. On behalf of humanity, we are honored by this invitation, she said, her voice steady despite the historic moment. Earth accepts with gratitude and humility, but we also come with a condition. The council leader's expression showed surprise. Member, candidates rarely set conditions. Earth proposes the immediate establishment of an intergalactic emergency medical corps, Su Jin continued. A team ready to respond to any medical crisis on any world, regardless of politics or council decisions. Based on Nalthoria, but staffed by volunteers from all worlds, it will ensure that no civilization ever again faces extinction, while others debate whether to help. A tense silence followed. The council had never allowed its authority to be circumvented in this way. Then, from the crowd, a young Nalthorian girl named Min stepped forward. Her family had been among the first to receive the human treatment. She carried a small tree in a pot. "This is the first moonlight tree to grow since the plague began," she said, her voice clear in the silence. "We thought they were extinct because they required telepathic connection to flourish. But this one grew differently. It adapted, just like we did." She placed the tree before the council platform. Everything can change and still survive. Even the council. The council leader looked at the tree, then at the monument of joined hands, and finally at the faces watching her. Nalthorian, human, and delegates from across the galaxy. "The council accepts Earth's condition," she announced. "The emergency medical corps will be established with our full support." As celebration erupted around them, Dr. Kim found herself standing before the monument with Elder Yu. "Did you ever imagine this outcome when you sent that desperate message to Earth?" she asked. Yu shook his head, tears in his eyes. "I only hoped for salvation. Instead, we found something greater, a new beginning for all of us." Above them, the stars shone bright in Nalthoria's night sky. Among them, Earth, small, distant, and no longer alone in the vast galaxy that had once dismissed it as primitive, but now recognized it as their salvation.